They thought they were saving the Republic. 60 men, armed with blades and ideals, believed one brutal act would preserve Roman liberty forever. He wanted glory. The old guard prided themselves on Roman tradition, short military terms, shared command deference to the Senate's authority. But the Senate demanded he disband his army before entering Rome. Caesar knew what that meant. Exile or worse. He refused. Instead, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legions in 49 BC, famously declaring, Alea iacta esti, the die is cast. This single act plunged Rome into civil war. But Caesar smashed those norms. He extended his governorship, amassed a veteran army loyal only to him, and showered his soldiers with spoils and praise. In public, he played the populist, throwing feasts and games for the masses, promising land to veterans and bread to the poor. In private, he believed only he could save Rome from its own squabbling elites. Caesar defeated Pompey's forces across Greece, Spain, and North Africa, scattering the old republic's champions to the winds. His unchecked power made him the enemy of tradition, a threat to every senator clinging to their ancient privileges. But in the shadows of the Forum, the seeds of betrayal had already begun to sprout, watered by envy, fear, and a desperate desire to save the Republic at any cost. And while Caesar dreamed of building an eternal Rome under his leadership, others were already plotting to bring him down in the name of liberty. At every turn, Caesar offered clemency, pardoning enemies, welcoming defeat. He posed as a merciful victor, magnanimous and invincible. Senators murmured of Caesar's increasing arrogance, his portrait stamped on coins, his statue placed among Rome's gods, his refusal to truly share power. Some claimed he even eyed a crown of blasphemy to Roman ears. To Caesar, these were mere trappings of power, but to men like Brutus and Cassius, they were harbingers of monarchy, the very evil Rome's ancestors had once bled to destroy. The Senate, wary of chaos, eventually confirmed him as a dictator perpetual. To the Senate's elite, this was dangerous. To Rome's people, it was exhilarating. Bread was cheaper, games were grander, and laws were passed swiftly. But to the Republic's defenders, he was a tyrant in the making, a king in everything but name. And Rome had shed its kings centuries ago with the fall of Tarquin the Proud. The Republic was sacred, or so they told themselves. As governor of Gaul, he embarked on a decade-long conquest that would transform both his fortunes and the fate of Rome itself. His campaigns in Gaul weren't just military expeditions, they were brutal, bloody masterpieces of propaganda. He sent back detailed reports of his victories, ensuring the Roman public saw him as a conquering hero, a savior bringing barbaric lands into the Roman fold. But instead, they awakened a fury they couldn't contain. The man they murdered, Julius Caesar, didn't just die. His death rewrote history, unleashed chaos, and brought about the very thing his killers feared most. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of revenge, cold and cosmic, playing out long after Caesar took his final breath. This is how one man's death ended a republic and birthed an empire that would rule the world for centuries. Long before the Ides of March, Julius Caesar was just another ambitious Roman noble. Caesar aligned himself with two powerful figures, Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, and Crassus, the richest man in Rome. This alliance, known as the First Triumph, Pompey brought military might and prestige, Crassus provided bottomless wealth, and Caesar, he brought charisma and ambition. Together, they steamrolled Senate opposition, carving out influence across Rome's vast territories. Maneuvering through the treacherous currents of Roman politics. Born into the patrician Iuli family, he was no stranger to the power games of the Senate. But unlike many of his peers, Caesar had an unmatched gift. He understood the hearts of the Roman people. While the Senate squabbled and the old aristocracy jealously guarded their privileges, Caesar saw that true power lay not just in noble bloodlines or ancient traditions but in winning the match early on. But Caesar wasn't content to merely share power. Meanwhile, his enemies in the Senate watched in horror as Caesar's popularity skyrocketed. By the time Caesar returned to Italy, he was a living legend. It was a swift, ruthless conflict. For many Romans, Caesar was the answer to years of political gridlock, corruption, and endless whispers grew in the halls of power. Yet Caesar pressed on, forging new laws, reorganizing the calendar, pushing Rome toward his vision of stability under one strong hand, his own. But what Caesar did not see or chose to ignore was that the Senate still held daggers in the dark. The stage was set. Caesar's unstoppable rise had transformed him into the most powerful man Rome had ever seen. As Julius Caesar's power grew, so did the unease in the Senate's marble halls. too many senators, Caesar was no longer just a political rival, he was a looming threat to everything the Roman Republic stood for. The Republic was built on the idea that power should be shared among Rome's elite, that no single man should hold absolute authority. His ancestor, Lucius Junius Brutus, had famously led the revolt that expelled the last Roman king and founded the Republic centuries earlier. For Marcus Brutus, opposing Caesar wasn't just politics, it was a family legacy. They believed the only way to save the Republic was to kill Caesar. Others resented his popularity with the people. Not all conspirators were as certain about their cause. Even Brutus struggled with the morality of the plot. He had once been a friend and protege to Caesar, who had shown him kindness and trust. Caesar had even spared Brutus in earlier political purges and raised him to high office. But Brutus feared that loyalty to one man could not come before loyalty to the Republic itself. This inner conflict would haunt him. To have a trusted friend turn assassin was the ultimate betrayal. On the morning of the Ides of March, Caesar entered the Senate hall, surrounded by his guards but unaware that death awaited him inside. What followed was chaos. Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Despite his wounds, he famously turned toward Brutus and uttered, "E tu, Brute." The conspirators hoped for gratitude or relief, but instead, they stirred a hornet's nest. The words capture the shock and heartbreak of being betrayed by a trusted ally, a personal and political earthquake that shocked the Roman world. When Caesar saw Brutus among his attackers, it pierced him deeper than any knife. Even as he prepared to stab his mentor, they saw him as a hero, a champion of the common man, and a leader who brought order to chaos. The Senate, in their eyes, was corrupt and killing Caesar was not an act of liberation. It was an act of treason against Rome itself, who often ignored the Senate's decrees in favor of Caesar's commands, and a few were simply ambitious men hoping to position themselves in the new order that would follow Caesar's death. Their plan was as bold as it was dangerous: to assassinate the dictator during a Senate meeting. They knew this would be murder, but they convinced themselves it was an act of patriotism, a necessary evil to save Rome from tyranny. They had to strike swiftly and decisively. There could be no hesitation or mercy. He saw himself as the protector of Roman liberty, standing against what he viewed as Caesar Astandra's ambition to become a king in all but name. Behind closed doors, the conspirators whispered and planned. Outside, many senators publicly professed loyalty to Caesar while secretly hoping the plot would succeed. The tension in Rome was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Caesar remained largely oblivious to the growing conspiracy. His confidence was bolstered by the loyalty of his guards and his sense of destiny. He believed he was chosen by the gods to lead Rome into a new era of greatness. Even warnings and omens about the Ides of March, the 5th day of March, failed to shake him. A soothsayer famously warned him to beware the Ides of March, but Caesar brushed it off, ignoring the dangers closing in. But Caesar's rise disrupted that fragile balance, and in the eyes of many, he was turning Rome into a monarchy, a one-man rule that the Republic's founders had fought for centuries to prevent. Among the most vocal opponents were two men who would play pivotal roles in the events to come: Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Their opposition wasn't just political. It was deeply personal and ideological. Brutus came from a noble lineage steeped in the history of fighting tyranny. But Brutus wasn't the only senator troubled by Caesar's growing power. Cassius Longinus, a shrewd and wealthy senator, was fiercely jealous of Caesar's influence and feared the erosion of the Senate's authority. Cassius was a master manipulator, skilled at stirring dissent and rallying support among those who resented Caesar's domination. He believed that if Caesar's dictatorship went unchecked, Rome's centuries-old system of governance would be destroyed forever. Together, Brutus and Cassius became the leaders of a secret coalition of senators, men who called themselves the Liberators. The conspirators numbered around 60 each, with their own reasons for joining. Some feared Caesar's power would make them irrelevant. Yet, the conspirators knew that their plot was risky. Caesar was popular, and the Roman people adored him as a military hero and reformer. Meanwhile, the Senate itself became a powder keg. One of the most chilling details was that Brutus would be among those delivering the fatal blows. The conspirators planned their assassination for a Senate meeting in the Theater of Pompey, a fitting location given Pompey's earlier rivalry with Caesar. As Caesar took his seat, the conspirators moved in. But the conspirators' greatest mistake was not the killing itself, it was underestimating Caesar's true power. The people of Rome loved Caesar. As news of the assassination spread, the city's mood shifted from shock to outrage. In the shadows of Rome's marble columns, the seeds of revenge had been sown, revenge not just from Caesar's allies, but from history itself. The morning of March 5, 1044 BC, dawned like any other day in Rome, calm, bright, and but beneath the sunlit sky, a deadly storm was gathering within the grand Senate chamber. Julius Caesar, the man who had reshaped the Roman world, was about to meet his fate. The Senate convened in the Theater of Pompey, a massive structure usually reserved for games and performances. Today, it was the stage for a far darker act, the assassination of a dictator. Caesar took his place in the hall, unaware that his last moments were at hand. He had ignored the warnings his personal soothsayers ominous, beware of the Ides of March, and even the desperate pleas of his wife Cal, who had suffered terrible nightmares foretelling his death. Caesar's sense of destiny made him believe he was invincible, chosen by the gods to lead Rome. Caesar arrived, surrounded by his loyal bodyguards, his confidence unshaken. Senators who had sworn loyalty to Caesar revealed their true colors with bloody blades, but their power lies in the story they tell. The pain. Caesar's death was supposed to stop a king from rising. Instead, it paved the way for an emperor and the downfall of the Senate's power. The conspirators believed their deed would be met with relief, maybe even gratitude. Instead, they had unleashed a hornet's nest. Of the Senate, composed largely of aristocrats, had long been at odds with the masses who lived in the crowded streets and alleyways. The people were stunned, then enraged. To them, the senators who had killed their beloved leader were traitors, murderers who had stabbed Rome's future in the back. To the people, Caesar was no tyrant. He was a hero, a man who had fought for their rights, provided grain to stave off hunger, and put on grand spectacles to entertain and distract them from the harsh realities of life. Brutus, Cassius, and their allies were forced to flee Rome under the cover of night. The dream of restoring the Republic crumbled like ash in the wind. With the crowd gathered in tents, Antony began cautiously, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears." Roman citizens, fueled by Antony's words, showed no mercy. The political order was shattered, and the streets became a battleground between the conspirators' supporters and Caesar's loyalists. He turned the people's grief into fury, and their fury into action. Rome was no longer a city of laws and debated, was a city divided, torn apart by vengeance and ambition. He skillfully maneuvered to consolidate power, rallying Caesar's veterans and allies, promising vengeance against the murderers. Their wrath was unrelenting, fueled by Antony's stirring oratory and their love for Caesar. He quickly allied with Antony, creating a powerful duo that would challenge the conspirators and take control of Rome. All of it started with the fury of a people who refused to forget their fallen leader and who would stop at nothing to avenge him. The streets filled with angry mobs, torch-bearing and shouting, and from the ashes rose a new order, led by those who wielded power not through the Senate's decrees but through armies and the will of the people. They tore down statues of the conspirators and set fire to the houses of those involved in the assassination. His tone was respectful to the conspirators at first, but as he spoke his words became a searing indictment. But the tide had turned irrevocably against them. A leader, it was the day Rome's heart shattered, and a new, darker chapter began. The stage was set for civil war, revenge, and the birth of an empire. Though the conspirators had control of the Senate, they did not control the city. Antony knew the power of public opinion, and he was determined to turn the tide. He showed Caesar's wounds, describing the betrayal in vivid detail. The crowd's mood shifted from curiosity to horror to uncontrollable rage. Betrayed by his trusted friend and protege. Among them stood Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of the plot, ready to turn betrayal into history. Once a place of debate and lawmaking, was stained red with his blood. He tried to fend off his attackers, but they came from all sides, relentless and merciless, saw the murder not as liberation but as murder and a betrayal of everything Rome stood for. Panting and shaken, who adored Caesar for his victories. "Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears," he began, in words that would live forever. Revenge from the grave can be the most powerful force of all. Antony's speech revealed Caesar's will, leaving land and money to the people, and showing his wounds to the crowd. The public's grief and anger turned to fury. Reforms, and gifts of grain and entertainment, erupted in outrage. Mark Antony seized the moment, delivering a fiery funeral oration that turned public opinion against the conspirators. Believed their deed would save Rome. They raised their bloody knives in triumph, declaring the Republic freed from a would-be king. Each stab wound was a blow not only to his body but to the Republic itself. What began as an act of patriotism quickly became a desperate fight for survival. Brutus and Cassius fled Rome, gathering armies to defend their actions. The Senate was forced to flee. Of March did not bring peace or freedom. It unleashed a violent struggle for power that would tear Rome apart. Rome was plunged into chaos, According to legend, Caesar gasped, "You too, Brutus," a phrase that has echoed through history as the ultimate expression of treachery. As he entered the Senate chamber, the 60 conspirators lurked in wait, their faces masks of determination and dread. The moment was tense but almost mundane. Senators greeted Caesar respectfully, some nervously. Suddenly, the attack began. The senators lunged forward, knives flashing in the morning light. Lucius Titius Cimber, one of the conspirators, approached Caesar with a petition. As Caesar dismissed him, the signal was given. The first blow was a surprise, but Caesar's instincts kicked in. The air filled with the sounds of chaos, grunts, cries, and the tearing of flesh. In the midst of the violence, Caesar spotted Brutus moving closer. Dagger raised, shock and betrayal flooded his eyes. Some historians debate whether Caesar really said those words. Caesar collapsed beneath the statues and marble columns of the Senate chamber, his body pierced 23 times. The Senate floor, the conspirators, but their triumph was short-lived. The shock of the assassination rippled through Rome like a violent earthquake. Caesar's loyalists, led by his trusted friend Mark Antony, the people of Rome, friends, riots broke out. IDs for the conspirators, but Rome itself had changed forever. The blood spilled on the marble that day stained the Republic's fate. The story of the Ides of March is not just a tale of betrayal. It is a brutal reminder that sometimes, the moment Julius Caesar's lifeless body hit the marble floor of the Senate chamber, a terrible silence seemed to grip Rome, only to be shattered moments later by an eruption of chaos the city had never seen before. Rome was a city of sharp divisions. News of Caesar's assassination spread through Rome like wildfire. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal friend and co-consul, immediately seized the moment. At Caesar's funeral, held in the Forum, Antony stepped forward and delivered one of history's most famous speeches. Antony revealed Caesar's will, which left generous gifts to the Roman people and bequeathed his private gardens to the city. Antony's speech was a masterclass in persuasion. The senators who had thought themselves liberators found themselves hunted by the very people they hoped to protect. The city was gripped by riots, looting, and bloodshed. In this chaos, Mark Antony positioned himself as the true heir to Caesar's legacy. Meanwhile, Octavian, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted heir, entered the scene. Though young and relatively unknown, Octavian was cunning and determined. The assassination, meant to save the Republic, had instead ignited a brutal civil war. The conspirators, now exiles, gathered forces in the east and preparing to fight for their vision of Rome. The people of Rome, once seen as pawns, had become a force of reckoning. The Ides of March was no longer just the day Caesar died. The death of Julius Caesar did not restore the Republic, it destroyed it. The city, once the proud capital of a republic, was now a powder keg ready to explode. And the Ides of March was just the beginning. Julius Caesar's brutal assassination had shattered the fragile peace of Rome, but it had not ended the fight for power. It had ignited a war that would tear the Republic apart. The conspirators, driven by their desire to restore the Republic, soon found themselves fighting for their very lives against the forces of Caesar's loyalists. Immediately after the assassination, Rome descended into chaos. Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted ally, seized the moment to rally them up. With the Roman people enraged and mourning their fallen leader, Antony became the voice of vengeance. But Antony knew that rhetoric alone would not be enough. Learning of Caesar's death, he hurried to Rome to claim his inheritance and assert his right as Caesar's successor. Brutus and Cassius fled Rome, gathering forces in the eastern provinces of the Republic, particularly in Greece. Here the forces of Antony and Octavian met the armies of Brutus and Cassius in the fields of Macedonia. The battle was fought over several days, with heavy casualties on both sides. They rallied legions of loyalists who still believed in the Republic and opposed tyranny. He managed to hold his ground for a time, but the tide of battle turned against him as Antony and Octavian's forces gained the upper hand. In despair, he committed suicide, stabbing himself with his own sword rather than face capture. Antony and Octavian emerged as the undisputed victors, their grip on Rome tightening. His death was a severe blow to the morale of the conspirators. Their cause was noble in their eyes, but the odds were stacked against them. His arrival changed the dynamics of the struggle. Antony and Octavian formed an uneasy alliance, bound by their mutual goal to avenge Caesar and crush the conspirators. His death marked the definitive end of the conspiracy that had assassinated Caesar and the collapse of the last hope for the Republic. To secure his position, he needed military power and allies. Enter Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir. Though just 19 years old and relatively unknown, Octavian was politically savvy and determined. Real power rested with the military commanders and the loyalty of their legions and cautionary tales, while the empire's grand architecture, law, and culture rose from the ashes of civil war. The Senate's power was broken, and Rome was ripe for a new order. His rivalry with Antony would soon come to a head, but for now, they ruled together, keeping the peace through strength and fear. They agreed to rule Rome as a triumvirate with Lepidus, another powerful figure, but the alliance was fragile. Meanwhile, the senators who had killed Caesar were in desperate retreat. That power was Octavian, Julius Caesar's adopted heir, who would soon take the name Augustus and become the first Roman emperor. The republic the assassins had fought to save was no more. In its place rose an empire strong, centralized, and ruled by a single man, just as they feared. But history has a way of twisting even the most well-intentioned plans into their exact opposite, and prosperity that allowed Rome to expand its borders, strengthen its infrastructure, and build the magnificent monuments that still inspire us today. Rome's democracy was replaced by a monarchy in all but name, a system that would last nearly 400 years in the West and another 1,000 years in its Byzantine form. He wasn't a dictator in the old sense. He avoided the title. Instead, they handed power to Caesar's heir, who would become emperor. The republic died not on the Ides of March, but slowly, in the shadow of Augustus's reign. He understood that Rome's citizens and senators were wary of monarchies. He cloaked his reign in the language of tradition, restoring temples, sponsoring games, and promoting peace after decades of chaos. His legacy endured through Augustus and the empire he founded, echoing through the ages as a testament to power, ambition, and fate. Too many Romans, Brutus and Cassius, became villains, traitors who murdered a popular leader and plunged the city into chaos. Their names became synonymous with betrayal. Sometimes, the hardest truths come from the unintended consequences of our actions. He presented himself as the guardian of Roman values, the restorer of the republic, even as he wielded power that far exceeded any dictator before him. The conspirators tried to fix it with violence, but the price was the birth of an empire that would dominate the world for centuries. Instead, he fashioned himself as princeps, the first citizen, a subtle nod to republican ideals. Their act of violence did not preserve liberty. It destroyed it and paved the way for a new world order. But in reality, he held supreme power, controlling the army, the treasury, and the government. In Dante Alighieri's Inferno, Brutus and Cassius are condemned to the deepest circle of hell, eternally chewed in the jaws of Satan himself, a chilling symbol of ultimate treachery. The Senate, which once ruled Rome, had become little more than a ceremonial body, granting legitimacy to Augustus's rule. The conspirators who plunged their daggers into Caesar's back couldn't have imagined the full scale of the irony they set in motion. The Senate itself was fractured. Some senators supported the conspirators, hoping to maintain a semblance of the old republic. Others shifted allegiance to Antony and Octavian, who now represented the rising tide of power. As the two camps mobilized, the Roman world was plunged into a civil war unlike any it had seen before. Their violent act unleashed a chain of events that ended with the very monarchy they feared, except now it was embodied not by Julius Caesar, but by his heir Augustus. The conflict culminated in a series of brutal battles, the most decisive of which was the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC. The fighting was fierce and unforgiving. Both sides knew the stakes were nothing less than Rome's future. Cassius, commanding one wing of the Republican forces, was convinced that the battle was lost after a misinterpretation of events on the field. Brutus, now the sole leader of the Republican cause, fought on with fierce determination. Finally, facing inevitable defeat, Brutus took his own life, falling on his sword. With their leaders gone, the remnants of the conspirators' forces surrendered or fled. But victory was just the beginning. The Civil War had devastated the Republic, leaving its institutions in ruins. Antony and Octavian now turned their attention to dividing the spoils of war and consolidating their authority. Octavian, in particular, was focused on his long-term goal, securing absolute control of Rome. The Senate, once the heart of Roman governance, was reduced to a puppet institution. In the end, the conspirators' plan to save the Republic had spectacularly backfired. The Republic was dead, buried beneath the ambitions of men who sought revenge and power. The irony was cruel. In trying to prevent one man from becoming king, the conspirators paved the way for an empire that would rule for centuries. Rome would never be the same. The Republic's ideals lived on only as memories. Caesar's death was avenged, but the price was the end of an era. For Brutus and Cassius, their legacy became one of tragic betrayal, men who had killed their friend to save a republic that no longer existed. For Antony and Octavian, it was the dawn of a new age, the Roman Empire, born from blood, ambition, and revenge. The death of Julius Caesar was meant to preserve the republic, to stop a single man from becoming a king, and to protect Rome's ancient traditions of shared power. With Brutus and Cassius defeated and dead, the stage was clear for a new power to emerge. After the civil wars, Octavian skillfully consolidated power. Augustus was a master politician. This new system, the Principate, would endure for centuries. Augustus's reign ushered in the Pax Romana, a long period of peace, but the Senate's role was forever diminished. The conspirators' dream of a restored republic was crushed under the weight of imperial power. The bitter irony is that the assassination of Caesar, meant to prevent tyranny, directly enabled the birth of the Roman Empire, a political structure far more absolute than anything Caesar had dared to claim. Brutus and Cassius had believed that by killing one man, they could save Rome's freedom. Even more striking was how history judged the assassins. This harsh legacy was immortalized centuries later in literature. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar, despite his flaws and ambitions, was remembered as a hero who changed the course of history. The conspirators' revenge from the grave was absolutely not in the sense of physical retaliation, but in the way Caesar's death reshaped the world. The story of Julius Caesar's assassination is a powerful reminder that history rarely unfolds as expected. The Republic fell not because of one man's ambition, but because the system itself was fragile and fractured. Augustus' rise was the ultimate revenge proof that Caesar's spirit lived on long after his death, transforming Rome forever. The assassination of Julius Caesar was a turning point not only in Roman history but also in the way betrayal is remembered and condemned across cultures and centuries. Brutus and Cassius, the men who plunged their daggers into Caesar's back, were branded not as heroes but as traitors, forever stained by their act of violence. The Roman people, loyal to Caesar, viewed them as criminals who had murdered a beloved leader. This sentiment only grew stronger as Mark Antony's funeral oration stirred the crowd to rage and vengeance. In Inferno, the first part of Dante's epic poem, the worst sinners are punished in the deepest circle of hell, reserved for traitors. From the moment Caesar's blood soaked the marble floor of the Senate chamber, public opinion turned sharply against the assassins. Over time, Brutus and Cassius became symbols of ultimate treachery not just in Rome but in Western culture. It wasn't just political commentary, it was a moral judgment that echoed across centuries, showing him as a man who believed he was doing the right thing, even as he plunged Rome into chaos. That cost was not only death by their own hands, but also eternal infamy. This nuanced depiction has shaped how many understand the assassination not as a black and white act of evil, but as a tragic betrayal with profound consequences. Instead, it triggered civil wars, the rise of Augustus, and the birth of the Roman Empire. Their names became warnings, reminding us that some betrayals echo through history louder than any victory and that revenge from beyond the grave can be the most enduring of all. Etched in history as men who killed their friend and destroyed their own cause. To betray a friend, a leader, or a cause was the ultimate sin and unforgivable act that doomed their souls. It was cultural, moral, and eternal. Brutus and Cassius remains a timeless cautionary story about loyalty, ambition, and the brutal consequences of betrayal. But their condemnation didn't end with the fall of the Republic. One of the most powerful portrayals comes from Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Written nearly 1,300 years after the assassination, Julius Caesar's name survived as a symbol of power. They crowned his heir an emperor. Caesar's revenge was slow, thorough, and absolute, not with a sword, but with time. He may have died on the Senate floor, but from his blood, an empire rose. The conspirators' names are synonymous with betrayal while Caesar's legacy conquered history itself. If that's not revenge, what is? Ambition and legacy. His story inspired countless works of literature, art, and political thought, reminding us that the pursuit of power can change the course of history forever. Here, in the ninth circle known as Judeca, Dante places Brutus and Cassius alongside Judas Iscariot, the betrayer of Christ, and the ideals the conspirators cherished faded into memory. In a chilling vision, these three are eternally chewed by Satan himself, their heads dangling in his gaping mouths. It is a punishment symbolic of their betrayal, gnawed and tormented forever, denied any peace. They were men caught in a brutal struggle between loyalty and duty, friendship and ideology. Brutus, in particular, wrestled with his conscience. Caesar's ultimate revenge wasn't just the rise of an Empirate was the way his death immortalized him as a legend and condemned his killers to eternal damnation. Shakespeare's famous play Julius Caesar captures this internal conflict, portraying Brutus as a tragic figure torn between love for Caesar and devotion to the Republic. This depiction cemented their place in the cultural imagination as the archetype of betrayal. But the story of Brutus and Cassius is more complex than simple villainy. Shakespeare's portrayal humanized Brutus. Still, the lasting legacy remains. Betrayal has a cost that echoes far beyond the moment it happens. For Brutus and Cassius, the assassination did not restore the Republic as they had hoped, but Caesar's revenge from the grave was far more than political. Rome transformed from a republic of many voices into an empire ruled by one. The Senate's power was crushed. Yet, the tale of Caesar, in the end, their legacy lives on, in trying to prevent one man from becoming king.